In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear friends, welcome back to the Theology Youth Group and to our English language readings of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Let us pray and proceed. O Heavenly King, comfort of the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us, and cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. I have to say that last week's reading, especially for me, proved to be very inspiring and very comforting, reading about the stories from the fathers, especially the one about Abba Silvanus' disciple, was very enlightening and very, very nice. We are continuing the reading of, Mark, disciple of Abba Silvanus. So we read the story about his obedience, and we sort of finished with it last week. Today, God willing, we continue on. Chapter 2. They said this of Abba Silvanus. Actually, if you will allow me, perhaps maybe I should say Silouan, because when I found the same story in the Russian language, the name was Silouan. So Silvanus almost kind of threw me off. I couldn't think of what the name was. So Silvanus, Silouanus. They said this of Abba Silouan, that as he was walking to Setis one day with the elders, and wishing to demonstrate his disciple Mark's obedience and show the reason for his affection for him, he said to him, seeing a small wild boar, "Boy, do you see that little buffalo?" He said to him, "Yes, Abba." "And do you see his horns, how attractive they are?" He said to him, "Yes, Abba." The elders were astonished at his reply and edified by his obedience. Now, I can tell you another story where the disciple was showing his elders' obedience to the visitors that came. I don't remember the exact names, unfortunately, do forgive me. However, the story is quite similar. As the visitors were in the cell, visiting with this elder and his disciple, the disciple said to the visitors, "See how great of an obedience and humility the elder has. I will demonstrate it to you." And so he said, "I will give him some porridge with rancid oil in it." So the oil would be very bitter and bad. And I'm going to ask him if it's good, and he will tell me that it is. And so he served it to the elder and said, "Abba, isn't that delicious? Isn't that absolutely wonderful?" And the elder simply and humbly said, "Yes, my disciple, it really is. It's quite tasty." And then he prepared the next dish of the meal, and it was perfectly fine. He said, "Now watch as I will tell the elder that this dish is somewhat spoiled, and he will agree with me as well." And so as he served a perfectly fine dish to the elder, he said, "And this one, Abba, somehow I think it's bad, it's bitter and spoiled." And the elder tasted it and said, "Yes, my son, it is as you say." And so the disciple demonstrated his elder's obedience, not necessarily to him, but ultimately obedience for the sake of peace, so as not to quarrel. And in this case, that's similar. What Abba Silouan illustrated in Brother Mark by calling the wild boar a buffalo. How many of us would say, "No, elder, you're mistaken. That's not a buffalo, that's a wild boar." But Saint Mark, for the sake of peace and humility, said, "Yes, it's quite nice," and agreed with him. Chapter 3. Abba Mark's mother came down to see him one day with great pomp. The elder went out to meet her. She said to him, Abba, tell my son to come out so that I may see him. So the elder went back and said to him, to Brother Mark, or Abba Mark, go out and let your mother see you. He was wearing ragged garments and came from the kitchen, so he was very dirty. He went out under obedience and closed his eyes and said to them, greetings, greetings, greetings. But he did not see them at all. His mother didn't recognize him, so she sent a message to the elder again, Abba, send me my son so that I may see him. He said to Mark, did I not tell you to go out so your mother would see you? Mark said to him, as you said, Abba, I went out, but please do not tell me a second time to go out because I don't want to disobey you. The elder went out and said to the mother, your son was he who came to meet you, saying greetings. Then he comforted her and sent her away. Now, here we should explain the reason why St. Mark didn't want to visit with his mother in earnest, speak to her and see her for himself. Has nothing to do with him having a negative attitude toward his mother, but the monastics, and this is something that we also hear in the instructions of St. Paisius of the Holy Mountain, where he says, once the monk has embraced monasticism, he should pray for the whole world, but he should not pray for his family. He should leave his family in the care of God. The reason for that is not because a monk wants to be or should be heartless and careless, and especially disobedient as such, because Abba Mark obviously obeyed Abba Silvan or Silvanus. However, seeing the relatives presents a tremendous temptation to the monastic to go back, to abandon the monastic undertaking, the monastic struggle, and to go back, because the enemy will say, well, look at how old your mother has gotten. You have to go back. You have to take care of her. You have to be the one to see her on her final journey, sort of into the life to come. So you have to go back. And in order not to go back, the monastics often avoided at all cost seeing their mothers, their fathers, or their otherwise close relatives. The mother of, I think, St. Pimen the Great, and Pimen had brothers as well. So, there were several monastics. All of them are saints. The mother came once to see them, and she was knocking at the gate of either their cell or the monastery where they were staying. And when they heard that it was their mother, because she said, my sons, I want to see you, open up. I believe St. Pimen essentially said, Mother, do you want to see us only now, or do you want to see us in the life to come? And she said, well, of course I want to see you in the life to come. He said, well, then please go back without seeing us or speaking to us. Then I promise you, we will all be together and you will see us forever in the life to come. You will inherit the kingdom of heaven with us if you depart peacefully now. And she did. And so in the same way, Abba Mark came out and kept his eyes closed and said, greetings, greetings, greetings. He allowed his mother to see him, that he was well, and he was healthy and otherwise okay, even though she didn't recognize him. But then Elder Silvanus, the saint, the Abba of Abba Mark, obviously would have absolutely no temptation to go back seeing the mother of his disciple, because he has no earthly connection, familial connection to her. And so he came out and spoke to her and told her that, well, you saw your son. He came out earlier and said, greetings, greetings, greetings. And then he comforted her and sent her away without actually letting her see Abba Mark and speak to him for that reason. And so sometimes the monastics flee men for the sake of avoiding idle conversations or conversations which would otherwise lead them to temptation. But that doesn't mean that they are unkind or unfriendly or have a lack of love. They pray for their visitors, they wish them well, but they sometimes avoid them for the sake of avoiding temptation, especially unnecessary temptation of too much talking. Chapter 4. On another occasion, Mark decided to leave Cetis and go to Mount Sinai and live there. His mother sent his Abba a message, begging him with tears to send her son out to see her. So the elder made him go, but as he was putting on his sheepskin to go and preparing to take leave of the elder, he suddenly burst into tears and did not go out after all. So we see essentially the same thing that I spoke of before. He decided to go to Mount Sinai, and so because I guess his mother got idea, she got knowledge, she got the news that he was traveling, she figured, well, as he is traveling, he should stop by and see me. She asked Abba Silwan, and he probably didn't have the heart to tell her no. So then he told Abba Mark, who was, as we know, the most obedient of his disciples, that he should go and see his mother. And so as he was putting on his sheepskin, sort of his warm outer garment for the travel, he burst into tears and didn't go at all, because he realized how great a temptation already there was on his way in seeing his mother. And so he chose to stay with Abba Silwan. Chapter 5. It was said of Abba Silwan that when he wished to go away to Syria, his disciple Mark said to him, "Father, I do not want to leave this place, nor to let you go away. Abba, stay here for 3 days." And on the third day, Mark died. So we see here that this disciple of Abba Silwan, he was clairvoyant, obviously. He knew that he was going to die, and so he didn't want the elder to leave before he died. He wanted the elder probably to bury him and to say the final funeral prayers over him, the prayers for the departure of the soul and so on. And thus he asks him. Somehow I almost get the idea that he might be, if not his teacher's superior, at least his equal. And of course we don't know the reason why Abba Silwan would have wanted to go to Syria, but we do know that at that time the monastics lived all throughout Egypt, Palestine, the Holy Land, and Syria borders Palestine and the Holy Land, so in Syria and so on. And of course Damascus is in Syria, St. John of Damascus is from there, so that's why probably he might have wanted to go either to a monastic community or to a place where other holy men would be nearby, so he would be encouraged by them or perhaps supported in his struggle. Magethius. There's no description or no biographical notes about Abba Magethius, and it's just 2 chapters. Chapter 1. While traveling through a certain region, Abba Magethius saw a monk whom someone had seized under the pretext that he had committed a murder. The elder went and questioned the brothers. Learning that he had been wrongly accused, he said to those who were holding him, "Where is the man who has been killed?" They showed him to him. Telling them all to pray, he went up to the dead man. While he was stretching his hands toward heaven, the dead man stood up. He said to him in front of everyone, "Tell us who killed you." The man said, "As I was going into the church, I gave some money to the priest. He stood up and killed me. Then he took me and threw me into the Abba's monastery. Therefore I beseech you to take the money and give it to my children." Then the elder said to him, "Go and rest until the Lord cometh and awakens you." So even though there are only 2 chapters about this Abba Magethius, we see his greatness manifest in this tremendous miracle that he worked. Not only raising the dead, albeit temporarily, but having the love and kindness and the care for a monk who was falsely accused of murder. So he raised the dead to tell everyone who had committed this murder. Now, the story is quite sobering, because as a monastic raises the dead man, the murdered man, to clear the name of another monastic, the name of a name of a priest who murdered this man is implicated. So he tells everyone who committed this murder. And thus we know and we see that even the priesthood does not save some people from committing horrible and grievous sins. And that in and of itself also can be and should be a sobering lesson to us, that on our way to salvation, we should not beguile ourselves into thinking, well, if I could only achieve some ecclesiastical rank and become a deacon or a priest, then, and forgive me for the colloquial idiom here, but then salvation is in the bag. No, in fact, quite to the contrary. St. John Chrysostom says that of the priesthood, I fear only few are saved, because the temptations presented to the priests are far greater than the temptations that face the layman on sort of regular basis. And in this particular case, the man who had attained to the dignity and to the grace of the priesthood had not overcome his avarice, which led him to murder the man who brought an offering to the church, so that he could keep that which was offered to the church for himself. Alas, what a terrible thing happened at that time. And yet, how great a miracle God has worked through Abba Magethius in order to clear the name of a monk who was falsely accused of this murder. Chapter 2. Another time, when he was living with 2 disciples on the borders of Persia, 2 of the king's sons, brothers by blood, went to hunt according to their custom. They spread nets around a wide area, at least 40 miles, so as to be able to hunt and shoot everything that was found inside the nets. Now the elder happened to be there with his 2 disciples. Seeing him all hairy and like a wild man, they were struck with amazement and said to him, "Tell us if you are a man or a spirit." He said to them, "I am a sinful man, and I have come away to weep for my sins, and I adore Jesus the Christ, the Son of the living God." They said to him, "There is no God save the sun, the fire, and the water," which they worshipped. So they were idol worshippers. "Therefore come and make sacrifice in their honor." He said to them, "They are creatures, and you are wrong, but I implore you to be converted and to acknowledge the true God, the creator of all these things." They said to him, "You say that the man who was condemned and crucified is the true God." The elder said, He who was crucified, he who has crucified sin and killed death, is he whom I say is the true God." But they tortured him and the brothers to compel them to offer sacrifice. After many torments, they beheaded the 2 brothers, but they tortured the elder for many days. Finally, they used a different procedure. Placing him between them, they shot arrows at him, one in front and the other behind. But he said to them, "Since you have agreed about shedding innocent blood, at the same time, tomorrow, at the same hour, your mother will no longer have you as sons, and you will be deprived of your love, and by your own arrows will shed each other's blood." They scorned his words and went to hunt the next day. A hart, H-A-R-T, so like a deer, a hart, ran close to them. They spurred their horses and galloped after it. They threw their javelins at it, and they pierced each other's hearts, as the elder had said when he warned them, and so they died. Another sobering story about Abba Magethius shows him in a completely different setting. He and his disciples not only were monastics, but also obtained the martyr's crowns. So they were venerable martyrs, as we would say in English, or in Russian it would be преподобные мученики. So the monastic martyrs. Now, notice how beautiful and how true an answer Abba Magethius gave to the 2 idol worshippers when they asked him why he was in that desert and whether he was man or spirit. He said that he had come into the desert to weep over his own sins. Think about it. A man, or the man, who raised a dead man in order to clear the name of a fellow monk who was wrongly accused of murder, does not say anything haughty or exalted about himself, but simply says that he has come into the desert to weep over his sins. And I will never forget the statement of Alexey Ilyich Osipov, the professor of theology at the Moscow Spiritual Academy, who says that when we hear the saints speak this way about themselves, to speak humbly about themselves, to consider themselves to be sinners and to be nothing, we should not even for a moment, not for a second, consider this. So we see the great struggle with which the saints avoided. So I think that whatever the trouble was with the Wi-Fi, the connection was terrible, and so I disconnected, and it seems to work better now. Abba Magethius, chapter 1. They said of Abba Magethius that if he left his cell and it occurred to him to leave the place where he was living, he would go without returning to his cell. He owned nothing in this world except a knife with which he cut reeds, and every day he made 3 small baskets, which was all he needed for his food. So what we're seeing here is that Abba Magethius kept the knife. Probably he took it with him all the time. He kept the knife as an instrument, but other than the knife and the clothes on his own back, he didn't need anything else for praying and for serving God and for living the life of piety. And that is why, if he was outside of his cell and decided that it was better for him to move to another place, he didn't even bother returning. He just walked away the way he was. Thus, we could say that he was truly free of all attachment to this world. And making 3 baskets a day, I guess, whatever the income that he gained from selling these 3 baskets was enough for him to buy food for the day and the material for the next set of baskets. Chapter 2. They said of Abba Magethius that he was very humble, for he was brought up by the Egyptians and in contact with many elders, including Abba Sissos and Abba Pimen. He lived on the riverbank at Sinai. It happened, as he himself related, that one of the holy men visited him and said to him, "Brother, what is your way of life in this desert?" He said, "Every second day I eat 1 loaf only." The elders said to him, "I advise you to eat half the loaf every day." This he did, and he found rest. Now, the reason why it would seem like he would only eat the same amount of bread, so what's the reason for not fasting entirely a single day? Because what he would do is he would fast a whole day, and then the next day he would eat 1 loaf of bread. And so one of the holy men came to him and said, "Well, it is better for you, actually better for you, to eat half a loaf each day." Now, I found personally this advice to be very practical. I certainly don't eat a loaf a day. God forbid, I'm not that great at fasting, unfortunately, at all. However, I have definitely noticed personally that, let's say I skip a meal and foolishly I think to myself, "Oh, I'll fast through lunch." By the time dinner comes and I sit down, even though I eat a fasting meal, for example, I tend to overeat. Thus, if you want to subdue your stomach and to control it, it is better to eat regularly, so to speak, on schedule, and to eat every day, but to eat a little, than to wait several days, to wait a day, to fast very strictly for a day, and then try eating the next day. Because then, even though you might eat the same amount, the speed with which you would eat it, I think the very sort of hunger that would grab a hold of you would be quite different. And thus, I think the holy man who visited him advised him that it's better to eat every day, but to eat half. So that way he would eat the same amount of food that he was eating, but because he wouldn't have such a long distance between meals, long time between meals, because he wouldn't be eating every other day, but he would be eating every day, it would be better for him actually to control this. Well, I'm sure he wasn't a glutton, but for us, it is easier to control gluttony if we eat regularly at the appointed times and we eat in measure. Because if we start skipping meal here and meal two, at the next meal, we tend to catch up, and that's not a good thing. Chapter 3. Some of the fathers questioned Abba Magethius, saying, If some cooked food remains over for the next day, do you recommend the brethren to eat it? The elders said to them, If this food is bad, it is not right to compel the brethren to eat it, in case it makes them ill, but it should be thrown away. But if it is still good, it is thrown away through extravagance in order to prepare more than. But if it is still good and is thrown away through extravagance in order to prepare more, that is wrong. So he gave an answer with great discernment, because he basically said, well, if the food is spoiled, then definitely it should be thrown away if it's spoiled overnight, because you don't want the brothers to get sick, because once they become sick with food, they won't be able to pray and think of God in the same way. But how should I say it? But if the food is perfectly good and the only reason you're throwing it away because you want to cook something else, well, then that is bad. Chapter 4. He also said originally, when we met together, we spoke of edifying things, encouraging one another, and we were like the angels. We ascended up to the heavens. But now when we come together, we only drag one another down by gossiping, and so we go down to hell. What he is talking about here is the fact that originally, meaning when they first came into the desert, when they got together, they would speak of beneficial and encouraging, edifying things, lifting each other up, and they were like the angels, meaning that they were seeking heavenly things. But now, when we come down together, we only drag one another down by gossiping. Well, I think that really requires no commentary. And so, we also should be aware of the fact that when we are getting together, it's wonderful spending time with fellow Orthodox Christians, with those who are of like mind. However, we must be careful. If the monastics, those who didn't live in the world but lived in the desert and made tremendous efforts to save their souls, if they could descend into gossip and thus sort of tear each other and drag each other down to hell, well, how much easier it is for us who live in the world and are far more exposed to idle speak, to gossip, and to various ill speech. How much easier it is for us to be damaged by such conversations, to be hurt by them, to be sort of undone by them, whatever the edification we acquire through prayer, through the reading of the Holy Fathers, if we think of these bad things when we end up doing things that are pretty sad and quite bad for us. Now, I promised today to answer a question if I was asked by someone, and I made a mistake of leaving my iPad upstairs, so I will attempt to connect to, I will attempt to connect to Instagram very quickly, and hopefully I'll be able to read it here. God willing, we would be able to do it. Let's see if that works out. I more or less remember the question that I was asked, but I would very much like to be able to read it properly. Now, what is happening here? For some reason, it's not displaying Instagram for me. I don't know if that's because of a poor connection or if something is wrong. Why would that be? Well, let's try something else. Well, it doesn't seem like I can see anything here either. Although this seems to be working, why is the other not working? Nope, not working. So I will have to attempt it by memory. I believe the question I was asked on Instagram, which I asked in one of my stories today, had to do with what I would recommend for a student to do. And I'm assuming we're talking about an Orthodox student, a student who's an Orthodox Christian. Tongue-in-cheek, I would say, well, first thing I would recommend, of course, is to be a good student, to be as good of a student as you can, to be the best. And definitely as a student, there's nothing wrong in standing out. Today when Abba Moshe was giving someone advice on not standing out, he was talking about the spiritual life. And as a monastic or a parishioner, obviously it would be prudent and wise not to stand out. But as a student, it's okay. As an Orthodox student, I think it's appropriate and important to keep the faith as the cornerstone of one's studies, to keep a good and clear idea as to why we have embarked on our studies. Because if we have begun a task such as studying for a career or for a future vocation, it would not be for the glory of God for us to do a bad job. It would be most important to do well in accordance with one's abilities, to be diligent, to be good, to be timely, to do a good job, not to be proud if the grades are good, but rather to remember to give glory to God for his help and his assistance. And so, in short, that's what I would advise all the students to do. If you're studying, study well, do well, because your current studies are the foundation of your future success, and it would ultimately be to the glory of God if you do well in your studies. Keep the faith. If your teachers treat you with prejudice for being a believer, for being a Christian, forgive them. Do not be enticed by liberal and unhealthy ideas. Do not absorb anything that is contrary to the Orthodox faith in the school, in the environment with fellow students. Seek out good friends if possible, and find people among fellow students who would inspire you to do well. And because we know that the company you keep reflects back on you. And if you want to be wise and if you want to do well, try to be friends with good students, because if you become friends with those who like to party and perhaps, miss the scheduled deadlines for their turning in their work and so on, well, you would end up with them in the same situation. So keep the faith, keep good friends, do well, and study for the glory of God. St. Paul, in one of his epistles, said, whether you fast or you eat, whether you sleep or you keep vigil, do all things for the glory of God. And I think every Orthodox student should do, if possible, an exemplary job, so that perhaps if your teachers praise you, if your fellow students notice that you do well, you could actually use that as an opportunity to witness your faith and to witness, to give credit where it is due, and to thank God for giving you the courage and the strength to do diligent and to do well. God bless, and God willing, we will see you next week. Goodbye.